things I look at, those 6 fundamental human needs. Is this person primarily about certainty? Are they about growth? Are they about connection? Are they about their significance? And so when I'm making that invitation, I try to incorporate some element about that. Hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you. And I know for you, connection or the team dynamics or our ability to learn and grow from this, like name those things that matter to them. So then they know like, hey, you're talking to me. And if you can take it one step further, maybe incorporate that DISC communication style, right? Direct or dominant, inspirational, steadiness, and then depending on who you're talking about, compliance. If they're more of a D, just kind of bulletize it out. Hey, I'd really like you to be here at this time, dark 30. If they're more of an S, even the invitation needs to be more conversational and relational. So take those factors into account, even with who you're addressing and the tone of voice with which you're addressing them.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities.
Hello, and welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. I'm your host, and today I would like to share with you an important tool that many of us rely on regularly, but we often take for granted in our leadership toolkit, and that is called the art and science of a compelling invitation. So many of our leadership tools look to what do we say once we're in the conversation, in the negotiation, at the table, in the meeting, in the planning session, and how do we, engage in the ways that we need to get the outcomes that we seek there. The compelling invitation is how do you get the right people to show up in the right state to be ready to rumble in those conversations. And that is something that we often kind of take for granted or just kind of do and not see the importance of it. Or maybe we have reasons to avoid making that invitation, or we're not sure how to make the invitation to get them to say yes to that conversation. And so that's what we want to unpack today. It's a very high frequently used conversation script. We use it in our personal lives. You're inviting people over for, dinner, or you're inviting somebody out to a date. It's asking your kids to do a chore. It's, negotiating with your boss for a raise. It's trying to share an idea with the project team and get their attention to say, hey, maybe there's a better way that we could do this. It could be having a performance challenging conversation with an employee. It could be bringing up a really difficult subject with your spouse or a loved one. But how you make that invitation in and of itself can create the anticipation and the excitement so that they're more likely to show up in a state of curiosity and willingness and openness so that the conversation can be more productive for both of you once you get there. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at it in the context of what's not a compelling invitation. And then we're going to look at the elements of what goes into a compelling invitation and maybe walk through a couple of examples how you can put it into practice in your life. So what isn't a compelling invitation? So what are the opposites or the antis of a compelling invitation? On one end of the spectrum, you have the opposite of an invitation, which the closest to that I could think is an exclusion, right? To exclude somebody. You're not invited to my birthday party, right? Like, I don't want to work with you. And, in a practical sense, we do that all the time by just saying, hey, that's not something that warrants my attention right now. So I'm not inviting everybody every day to every meeting. But exclusion could also be something where you're hesitant and you're afraid and you're avoiding an engagement that really is important and needs to happen. And there's 2 really big limiting beliefs that will often cause you to avoid making or attempting a compelling invitation. And those 2 reasons are, number one, if I just leave it alone, it'll magically take care of itself. It'll all get better. And again, there's a time and a place when that might actually be the case. Time is the ultimate healer of things. But more often than not, leaving things alone, they just fester or they continue to compound the challenges that they create. Or if it's an idea you have, the team continues to suffer with a suboptimal idea that could have been improved by your idea. And all of that is just in sunk costs going under after good money. On the other side, you have another limiting belief, which is, well, if I try to do it, it might make things worse. right? It could stir up some bad feelings and that'll be really uncomfortable and we're not going to like that. And again, it's a limiting belief in the sense it's partially true. If you do it poorly, if the situation's already so far gone, that might be the inevitable conclusion. But again, not dealing with the conversation and not doing it in a proactive, professional, and compelling way is not likely to suddenly make things better, right? And if they're going to get worse from that conversation, if you do everything else right, well, then it was going to get worse anyways. So I like to look at it as, avoiding the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable, is your worst possible option. I'm more interested in how can I do it in a way that's effective. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have an imitation that is so intense and is so hard and is so directive and demanding. It's no longer an imitation. It's now an invasion, right? Like you are imposing yourself, imposing your will. You're slinging accusations. It's an assault, right? Like I am grabbing you and I'm dragging you to the table, and again, yes, there's a time and a place maybe for that. But with somebody that you're in a long-standing relationship with at work or professionally, and you're going to have lots and lots of these over the years, that wears thin really, really quick. So when I say a compelling invitation, I'm talking about that sweet spot there where you are making an offer to bring them in. And when you look at the root word invite, it literally means to like invest into, like to invest care and concern into. So you're saying, hey, you matter to me and this subject matters to me and I think it matters to us. I'd like to work with you on it, and to do it in a way that is compelling, that's interesting. So they're not wanting to then avoid and evade you and push you off. And they're also not anticipating it with dread. I think that puts us in the sweet spot. Now, what goes into a compelling invitation? Lots of great thought partners and authors out there that talk about it. A couple of them that I'll mention is when you look at the Crucial Conversations, which we had the privilege of kind of beta testing some of those materials way back in the day. They talk about this notion of you got to create safety before you can get into the content, right? So start with heart. So that really kind of speaks to the notion of, you want to, strengthen the relationship and make sure that it's like, hey, I'm interested in a mutually beneficial outcome here. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got like Chris Voss, who was the author of Never Split the Difference. And of course, he was a former FBI hostage terrorist negotiator. So you're like, how do you get a terrorist or a hostage taker to be willing to have a conversation with you? And again, if you just go in there and you're just like, look, you're wrong and you're bad and I shame and I blame and I push you down and your cause doesn't matter so much, it's just going to end worse for everybody. So he's got some stuff there about like, do an accusation audit, look at, how are you, making the invitation to make sure that on the one hand, you're not making accusations, but even so far as to, do an audit of it to say that I'm not going to make these accusations. This is what this conversation is not going to be about. It's going to be about this. So you can begin to rebuild trust, even in the worst of circumstances. And in both of them, they kind of talk about, really contrasting, what you don't want out of the conversation and being clear what you do want out of the conversation about the outcomes. And so we're gonna kind of dig into that. There's also some work around a humble inquiry by Edgar Schein and the conversation intelligence by Judith Glaser. So these folks are looking at it from different ways of saying, again, how do you get them either neurologically in the case of conversational intelligence, or how do you invite it and the words that you choose so that, again, you're getting them in the best state to be a willing partner with you. It doesn't mean that they're going to agree with everything, but it gives you the best odds to a productive conversation. So when you look at the anatomy of a compelling invitation, I'm thinking of my oldest son, Taryn, right now. So he's engaged. Him and his fiance, Roshi, are planning their wedding, and they're looking at venues and flowers and all this stuff. And there's going to come a point where they have the wedding invitation, right? And when you think of a wedding invitation or an invitation to a significant, event, there's some basic elements that go into it, right? It's like, first of all, it's addressed to, right, on the outside page, who is it that this invitation is addressed to? And the best invitations are very personalized. It's like, to this person, and there's a sense of, you are VIP, like you're really important in our lives and we want you there. And then who else is going to be there, right? Well, this is the marriage of so-and-so and so-and-so, or this is the birthday party for so-and-so, or this is the retirement party for so-and-so. And so you have, like, who are the other partners that are going to be involved in this event? Then you have the logistics, of course, which we're going to come back to that. That's how you want to close a compelling invitation. But there's also like, what is the purpose for this event? Like, we are here to celebrate this wedding or the baby shower or retirement, whatever. So there is a little bit of the topic, but we're not going to give you the play-by-play agenda. We're not going to put all the substantive issues in here. We're just letting you know, like, hey, contextually, what is this about? I'll say this. I personally struggle when somebody just sends me a text like, can we talk? And it's like, we need to talk. And you're like, I have no idea what it's about. And so it's like, that can engender dread and anxiety and confusion of people not wanting to talk to you because it's like, well, I don't know what you want to talk about. So you want to have enough in there that they know what it is without it, trying to spill into the whole positions. And then there's also a little bit about the tone. Like, what's the atmosphere of this is going to be like? Is this going to be like a farmhouse, kind of casual? Is this going to be really formal, kind of a thing? What's the attire that we're going to wear, right? This is beach attire. This is business casual. This is, super red carpet. So invitations include all of these elements when you think about it. And I think many of those have parallels when you're inviting as a leader somebody to have a conversation with you in a relationship that you care about. So let's look at those parallels, kind of break them down, and then go through a few examples. So one of the items is, again, the person's name. Who are you inviting? And when you're wanting to invite somebody, again, this could be your boss because you're wanting to get a raise, or to a teammate because they're getting on your nerves and you want them to change how they're interacting with you, or an employee who you want to assign a new project but you think they're going to be freaked out by it. Whoever or your significant other because you're having challenges in your marriage. Like these are all conditions where that person is important. They matter, and you've been around with them long enough to learn a few things, and so put that to good use. One of the things I look at those 6 fundamental human needs we talked about way back on episode 6. Is this person primarily about certainty? Are they about growth? Are they about connection? Are they about their significance? And so when I'm making that invitation, I try to incorporate some element about that. Hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you. And I know for you, connection or the team dynamics or our ability to learn and grow from this, or our ability to really gain some reputation points and market share in the workplace on this, like name those things that matter to them. Right. So then they know like, hey, you're talking to me. And if you can take it one step further, maybe incorporate that DISC communication style, right? Direct or dominant, inspirational, steadiness, and then either, depending on who you're talking about, compliance, that C. If they're more of a D, just kind of bulletize it out. Hey, I'd really like you to be here at this time, dark 30. If they're more of an S, even the invitation needs to be more conversational and relational. So take those factors into account, even with who you're addressing and the tone of voice with which you're addressing them. Then the next piece is to be able to say, okay, I need to acknowledge the relationship, let them know that you care about them. So you just modeled it by using their name and by, addressing something that's important to them. But I don't want to leave anything up to chance. I want to reaffirm that even if maybe we have a challenge, or even if I'm trying to challenge the thinking in an innovative conversation, I want to reaffirm how important this relationship is. So clues like, hey, it's really important to me that you and I have a great working relationship, or hey, the success of this project is something we both have put a lot of time into, and I want to make sure that we give it the best chance we get, or you're having a conversation with your significant other and you're like, listen, honey, I love you to the moon. I'd do anything for you. I'd like to talk a little bit about something that's creating some friction in our relationship. So you're reaffirming the relationship, even though you might be acknowledging there's a challenge or there's something you would like to work on. But the reason you want to have the conversation with them is because you value them. So make that explicit, really, really anchor on that. So that's the personal part of it, right? Then you get to the, I want to talk about the outcomes. And what is it that I want out of this, and what is it that I don't want out of this? And Crucial Conversations calls it contrasting. Like I said, Never Split the Difference calls it an accusation audit. So name both, right? Give some boundaries. Now, when I say what do you want out of it, I'm not saying provide the position or the specific solution that you want. Talk about the outcomes, the results. What would be the ripple effect if we work something out? So you have this curiosity about how we're going to get there, but you're really trying to anchor where whatever path we choose gets us. So that's going to be things like, hey, it's really important to me that we have a successful project here, or I want to make sure we're doing the right thing by the customer, or I want to make sure that you're able to get what you need, and I'm also able to move forward on the things that I need. So those are things where you're saying, what are the outcomes that you want without specifying the solution? So I'm not going to say, look, if you would get the heck out of my way and give me the data that I need, then I can achieve my results. No, it's like, look, I want to be able to make sure that I have the data I need to support the informed decisions we're trying to make, while at the same time protecting confidentiality and not being a burden to you. All right, I'm talking about the outcomes and the edges. And then, of course, what do I not want would be, it's like, look, I don't want this to be, a beat on session. I don't want this to be a download session. I don't want this to be a one-way conversation. I don't want you to walk away feeling like you're not heard. So saying what you don't want from an outcome perspective might also be appropriate. You don't always have to do that. We're not always negotiating with terrorists, although sometimes we're talking to toddlers and coworkers and employees. It kind of feels like that. But if you need that, add that in so you're really, contrasting those two to make it safe. And then, what's the ask? Like, look, I would love to get a 30-minute conversation one-on-one with you. Then you go for the close of, hey, what time works for you? Or could you do Thursday, or could you do next Tuesday? Would you like to meet in person, or would you like to meet, virtually? Do you want to do it just you and I, or do you want to include these other people? So in the logistics, provide some options. If you come across where like, you will be in my office at 0900 hours, snap to attention, ready to rock. That doesn't have that's a demand. That's a command. That's not an invitation, right? An invitation has to allow people to say yes, which means it's got to allow them to say no. And sometimes being able to get to a place where they're comfortable saying no indicates that actually the relationship is actually working. So here are the options, you and I one-on-one, this location, this bat channel, this bat location. So those are the elements, right? Now that's kind of like, okay, gotcha. That's kind of matches what a wedding invitation might include. But now let's walk through some scenarios. So maybe from a sales perspective, right? You might be in a place where you've got a prospective client. Maybe it's a repeat customer, right? And you're wanting to get time with them to show them something new or to extend on something you're building, right? That would be a time for a compelling invitation. So, and I'm not a sales training guy. There's a million scripts out there about how to get the lead and close it. This is just more casual, in me, but it's an example of a compelling invitation. And for me, it would look like, hey, listen, I've really enjoyed being able to work with you in the past. I think we've done some great things together. We've had some new developments with some of our services or our products. I would love to just run by and make sure you're aware of them. And I know you're super busy, but I would love to be able to show it so you've got the information you need to make important decisions with your business. Could I get a time with you next Tuesday or next Thursday, for 20 minutes? And would you like to be just you and I to give you an orientation? There's somebody else from your team you would like to have there so you don't have to relay to them separately, right? So that's an example of a compelling invitation for forwarding a sale. If you zoom into the areas I'm a little better at, which is more of the internal dynamics and client dynamics, right? I'm not a sales trainer. There's lots of great podcasts out there on there. You guys, man, listen to them. Don't listen to me. But let's say that you're working with a boss or an executive or some authority figure that's either your supervisor or a few levels up, and maybe you'd like to get a raise. Maybe you'd like to have them change some of their behaviors with the way they're showing up at times because it's causing a lot of friction for the teams. A conversation there looks like listen to this. Hey boss, hey supervisor. It's really important to me that I am able to contribute to the success of our team and to our accounts the very best that I can. And I always promised that I would reach out if there was an opportunity I think that could strengthen things. I really enjoy our working relationship. I'd like to be able to share with you some ideas that I have about some of the dynamics that are unfolding between some of your interactions and some of our team interactions. Would you be willing to have a conversation with me about that so we could see if there's a way we could operate at a higher level? Would it be okay if I brought this at our next one-on-one? Would you rather we do more of a walk and talk around the building? What might work best for you? So again, notice it's got those same elements in there, but you're really trying to, reaffirm the relationship, talk about what you want, maybe talk about what you don't want, and then give some options with the logistics. I'll give another example with if you're the authority figure, you're the supervisor, or maybe you've got an employee that's struggling, right? You're getting some bad customer feedback. Maybe you've directly observed some performance issues. Maybe the quality of work starting to suffer, or there's some behavioral issue going on, right? And we all know there's a million of those. the temptation would be to just say like, listen, this is not working and you need to clean it up and get back to work. And again, time and a place for that, you guys. I'm not going to lie. Absolutely appropriate at times. But again, if this is somebody you've invested with over the years, maybe they're having a rough patch, maybe we're shorthanded and we're just like, look, we got to get the best out of everybody we can right now. This isn't like it's an all or nothing. Again, a compelling invitation there is like, listen, employee so-and-so, I'd love to be able to have more of a focused conversation with you. We have an emerging pattern of some not so great feedback and some near misses and some performance challenges. And you matter to me. We've been in a lot of good situations together. I want the best for you. I want the best for the company. I don't want this to be a defensive arguing conversation. I really want to seek to understand what's behind some of these comments and see if we can come up with a plan to address them. Right. So I'd like you to come prepared to our next one-on-one where we can discuss, some of these moments where we're getting some feedback and maybe address what was contributed to it from our side so that we can address that in the future. All right. Please come prepared for that. Even when you have the authority or the power to kind of force somebody to do something, and even if it's kind of not negotiable, it's like, we're going to have this conversation. Are we going to have it now or we're going to have it in a couple of days? There's still the freedom and there's the respect of the choice that's involved in that. So those are some examples, again, with prospective clients, with an actual client, with a boss, with an employee. You can do it with coworkers. It applies when you're, chatting with your significant other, where you're like, hey, babe, we need to talk, right? And it's like, well, that can evoke a lot of dread, right? It's like, hey, babe, our relationship means the world to me. There's some stuff that's starting to kind of build up for me, and I'd like to talk with you about it before it becomes a thing. Could we chat maybe this Saturday, maybe Sunday after church, or maybe go on a date night where we can explore that a little further. I want to work with you to figure out how this can work for both you and I. These are the same kind of conversations and the same kind of pattern. But what's beautiful about a compelling invitation is when you don't just take it for granted, right? You don't avoid it, but then you also don't just assault them with it. And you also don't do it in a lane kind of just like goes like on, hey, can we get in a room and just, work this out, right? You're not going to have them show up if you don't do it purposefully in a state of curiosity, in a state of respect, in a state of safety where they're willing to share their valid perspectives as well, which is going to reduce your ability to create, solutions and negotiated outcomes and innovations and resolutions to problems otherwise. So the next time you're thinking about getting somebody's attention and you're looking to have a heartfelt conversation, either for an innovation or a problem that you're having, think about how some of these elements can shape your compelling invitation to get them to show up more willing, more ready, and more quickly to have a purposeful conversation with you. And I bet you'll find that not only are the results better from that conversation, the relationships are stronger for it. Thanks for listening to this episode, you guys. I hope this was a helpful set of tools for you and your toolkit. Wish you all the best. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll keep you up with some great guests we have coming down the pipeline here. These interviews are amazing, you guys. I'm so excited to share them with you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.